When the Galactic Council classified humans as expendable labor, they never bothered to study what made humanity dangerous. They saw soft skin, fragile bones, and short lifespans, perfect for dangerous jobs no other species would take. What they missed was something far more terrifying than claws or armored hide: human adaptability, ingenuity, and the terrifying stubbornness that turns a cornered human into something even apex predators learn to fear. Mechanic third-class Elena Vasquez was supposed to die on Zirian Prime, left behind when her transport ship fled a Vorthack pack attack. She had nothing but a broken maintenance kit, a failing oxygen recycler, and 48 hours before the wolf-like aliens returned to finish what they started. The Council wrote her off as acceptable losses. Her crewmates assumed she was already dead. They were all wrong. What happened next would reshape how every species in the galaxy viewed humanity, and make them question whether they'd been keeping the wrong creatures in cages all along. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the grimy porthole of the transport vessel profit margin, watching the rust-colored surface of Zirian Prime grow larger beneath them. The planet looked dead from orbit, all jagged mountains and poisonous atmosphere, but she knew better. Down there, in the mineral-rich caves, lay enough rare Earth elements to power a dozen star systems. That's why the Galactic Council had sent them here, and that's why humans like Elena were considered perfect for the job. Expendable. The word wasn't spoken aloud aboard Council vessels, but Elena could see it in every alien face that looked at her. Captain Vextar, a towering Altarian with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, had made it clear during the briefing. Humans were cheap labor. They bred fast, died young, and asked for minimal compensation. Perfect for dangerous mining operations where more valuable species might be lost. Vasquez, Chief Engineer Korth, growled from across the cramped passenger hold. The Borgani's mandibles clicked with annoyance as he consulted his datapad. You're on deep shaft maintenance. Levels 15 through 23. Elena nodded without emotion, though her stomach twisted. The deep shafts were where the Vorthack had been spotted. Native to Zirian Prime, the pack hunters were roughly wolf-like in appearance, but 3 times the size, with metallic claws that could slice through steel plating and intelligence that bordered on cunning. The Council classified them as manageable wildlife, which meant they occasionally killed workers, but not enough to impact profit margins. The transport shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, and Elena felt the familiar weight of dread settling in her chest. She'd been working Council mining operations for 3 years now, ever since the war between Earth and the hegemony had ended with humanity's unconditional surrender. The peace treaty had been simple. Humans would provide manual labor for dangerous operations across the galaxy in exchange for being allowed to exist. Some deal. The mining complex sprawled across a volcanic plateau like a metal cancer, all prefabricated buildings and atmospheric processors belching smoke into the alien sky. As the transport settled onto the landing pad with a grinding thud, Elena gathered her gear: a basic maintenance kit, a rechargeable plasma cutter, and a recycled oxygen unit that had seen better days. Standard equipment for expendable labor. Remember, humans, Captain Vextar announced as the airlocks cycled open. Your contracts specify completion of assigned tasks regardless of local wildlife activity. Failure to complete assignments will result in immediate termination of employment and abandonment on planet. The group of 12 human workers shuffled forward silently. Elena recognized most of them from previous operations. Rodriguez with his missing left eye, courtesy of a cave-in on Proxima 7. Singh, who still limped from the acid burns she'd received on the sulfur moon of Tau Ceti. And Morrison, barely 19, who'd volunteered for council work rather than see his family starve in the refugee camps of Earth. The mining complex reeked of sulfur and burning metal. Overseer Dalthek, a hulking Krogati with tusks like broken ivory, assigned them to quarters in the human section, a cluster of corrugated metal buildings with barely functional life support. Elena dumped her gear on one of the narrow bunks and checked her oxygen recycler. The battery indicator showed 73% charge, good for maybe 40 hours of continuous use. She needed to be careful. The next morning, Elena descended into the mining complex proper. The elevator dropped through 23 levels of carved rock and steel reinforcement, each level marked by the steady increase in temperature and the growing smell of something wild and predatory. By the time she reached level 15, her coveralls were soaked with sweat despite the cooling units built into the life support system. The deep shafts were a maze of tunnels carved by automated mining drones, their walls scorched black by plasma cutters and studded with sensor nodes that monitored for gas leaks and structural instability. Elena's job was simple: maintain the ventilation systems that kept the toxic atmosphere of Zirian Prime from flooding the tunnels with poison. She'd been working for 3 hours when she heard the first howl. The sound echoed through the tunnels like the scream of tortured metal, but Elena recognized it immediately. Board hack. The pack hunters had found their way into the deep levels, probably following the scent of human workers. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her plasma cutter, though she knew it would be useless against a full-grown Vorthack. Her comm unit crackled to life. All human workers returned to surface levels immediately. Vorthack pack detected in deep shafts. Repeat, evacuate deep levels now. Elena was already moving, but she could hear them in the tunnels around her. The click of metallic claws on stone, the heavy breathing of apex predators, and the sound of something large moving through the darkness. She reached the central elevator shaft just as the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in hellish red light. In the crimson glow, Elena could see them. 7 Vorthack emerging from the tunnel mouths like shadows given form. They stood nearly 4 meters tall, their wolf-like heads crowned with bone ridges, and their eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like molten gold. Their claws scraped against the stone as they spread out, surrounding the elevator shaft. And Elena, the lead Vorthack, larger than the others and bearing scars that spoke of countless hunts, tilted its head and made a sound that might have been laughter. It knew she was trapped. They all knew. Elena's comm unit erupted in panicked voices as the other workers reported their positions. Most had made it to the upper levels, but Rodriguez was trapped in Shaft 7, and Morrison hadn't responded to hails. The Vorthack pack seemed to be coordinating their hunt, driving the humans towards specific locations. Emergency evacuation in progress. Captain Vextar's voice cut through the chaos. All non-essential personnel report to transport immediately. Elena keyed her comm. Vasquez here, trapped in Central Shaft, level 15. Requesting immediate extraction. Silence stretched for long seconds. Then Captain Vextar's voice returned cold and bureaucratic. Negative, Vasquez. Transport departing in 15 minutes. Your contract specifies completion of assigned maintenance tasks. The meaning was clear. She was being abandoned. Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she watched the Vorthack slowly close their circle. Around the galaxy, humans were considered weak, fragile creatures suitable only for dangerous jobs that more valuable species wouldn't take. They bred fast and died young, so individual losses were acceptable. But as Elena hefted her plasma cutter and checked the charge on her oxygen recycler, she found herself thinking about her grandfather, who'd fought in the resource wars on Earth before the hegemony arrived. He'd told her stories about humans cornered by impossible odds, about what happened when you pushed her species too far. The Vorthack might be apex predators on their world, but they'd never hunted anything like Elena Vasquez. The lead Vorthack took a step forward, its claws leaving gouges in the stone. Elena smiled, showing her teeth in an expression that would have made any human take a step back. The aliens had written her off as acceptable losses, but they'd forgotten something important about her species. Humans were persistence hunters. They didn't give up when cornered. They got creative. Elena raised her plasma cutter and triggered the emergency override that would overload the power cell. The tool wasn't designed to be a weapon, but Human engineers had learned to improvise with whatever tools they had available. The cutter began to whine as energy built up in the core, and Elena's smile widened. "Come on then," she whispered to the Vorthack pack. "Let me show you what expendable labor looks like when it decides to stop being expendable." Above them, she could hear the transport engines spinning up for departure. Captain Vextar was keeping to his schedule, abandoning her to die in the dark tunnels of an alien world. The Galactic Council would write her death off as an acceptable loss, another human worker killed by predictable wildlife. They were wrong about so many things. The Vorthack pack lunged forward as one, their metallic claws extended and their mouths opened to reveal teeth like obsidian daggers. Elena triggered the overloaded plasma cutter and dove sideways, rolling behind a support beam as the improvised explosive turned the central shaft into a miniature sun. The explosion shattered emergency lighting and sent chunks of stone flying like shrapnel. Elena felt the heat wash over her even behind cover, and her oxygen recycler's alarm began shrieking warnings about atmospheric contamination. But when the smoke cleared and the ringing in her ears subsided, she could hear something new in the tunnels. Wounded Vorthack making sounds she'd never heard before. Sounds that might have been whimpers. Elena checked her equipment. Oxygen recycler damaged, but functional, showing 31 hours remaining. Maintenance kit intact. Plasma cutter destroyed in the explosion, but she still had her tools and her engineer's knowledge of the mining complex. More importantly, she had something the Galactic Council had never bothered to study in humans: spite. Elena Vasquez had been abandoned to die on an alien world, written off as acceptable losses by creatures who thought humans were nothing more than cheap, disposable labor. They'd made a critical error in judgment. They'd left her alive. The surviving Vorthack were regrouping in the tunnels, their hunting instincts undimmed despite their injuries. But Elena was already moving, disappearing into the maze of maintenance shafts that only human workers were small enough to navigate. She had 40 hours of oxygen and the entire mining complex to use as her weapon. The hunt was just beginning, but the predators were about to discover they'd become prey. Elena crawled through the maintenance shaft with practiced efficiency, her movements silent despite the cramped conditions. The shaft was barely wide enough for human shoulders, a deliberate design choice by the Galactic Council. Only humans were small enough and desperate enough to perform maintenance in such confined spaces, making them perfect for the job. Now, that same design was keeping her alive. She could hear the Vorthack in the main tunnels below, their claws scraping against stone as they searched for her scent. The explosion had wounded 3 of them badly enough to slow the pack down, but it hadn't stopped them. If anything, injuring the hunters seemed to have made them more determined. Elena reached a junction in the maintenance system and pulled out her datapad, calling up the schematics of the mining complex. The screen cast a pale blue glow in the darkness, and she studied the layout with an engineer's eye for detail. 23 levels of tunnels, 17 atmosphere processors, 43 ventilation shafts, and a central power core that supplied energy to the entire operation. More importantly, every system in the complex had been designed with human-accessible maintenance points. The other species were too large to service their own equipment properly, which meant Elena knew this place better than any Vorthack ever could. She just had to survive long enough to use that knowledge. Her oxygen recycler showed 28 hours remaining. Elena did the math quickly in her head. She could stretch it to 36 hours if she stayed calm and avoided unnecessary exertion. After that, the toxic atmosphere of Zirian Prime would kill her just as surely as Vorthack claws. But 36 hours was a long time for a human engineer with access to a mining complex full of improvised weapons. Elena closed the datapad and continued through the maintenance shaft, moving toward the atmospheric processing station on level 12. The shaft opened into a service chamber filled with humming machinery and the constant whisper of filtered air. Elena dropped down silently and began examining the processing equipment. The atmosphere processors were designed to filter the poisonous gases of Xerion Prime and provide breathable air to the tunnels. They were also connected to every level of the mining complex through a network of ventilation shafts. Elena smiled as she studied the system, her engineer's mind already working out the possibilities. The Galactic Council thought humans were simple laborers, good for nothing but dangerous manual work. They'd never bothered to study what human engineers could do when properly motivated. Elena began disconnecting sensor cables and rerouting power conduits, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years maintaining alien machinery. The work was delicate, requiring precise timing and careful attention to safety protocols. She ignored every safety protocol she'd ever learned. Within an hour, Elena had turned Atmosphere Processor 12 into a weapon. The system was now configured to release concentrated bursts of industrial cleaning solvent into specific sections of the ventilation network. The solvent was designed to dissolve mineral deposits in the air filtration system, but Elena had other uses in mind. Vorthak had enhanced senses of smell, which made them excellent hunters. It also made them vulnerable to chemical attacks they'd never evolved to handle. Elena activated her improvised weapon and waited. The effect was immediate. Throughout the deep levels, Vorthak began making sounds of distress as industrial solvent flooded their sensitive nasal passages. The pack's coordination broke down as individual hunters fled to areas with cleaner air, abandoning their systematic search patterns. But Elena wasn't finished. She moved through the maintenance shafts like a ghost, visiting atmosphere processors on levels 14, 16, and 18. Each system required different modifications, but the principle remained the same: turn the mining complex's own infrastructure against the creatures that hunted her. Processor 14 began releasing superheated steam into the ventilation system. Processor 16 started cycling between extreme temperature variations that would disorient creatures adapted to the stable environment of Xerion Prime's caves. Processor 18 began generating subsonic frequencies that would interfere with pack communication. By the time Elena reached level 10, the Vorthak pack was in complete disarray. She could hear them throughout the complex, their frustrated howls echoing through tunnels as they struggled to adapt to an environment that had suddenly become hostile. Elena checked her oxygen supply. 21 hours remaining. She was ahead of schedule, but the hardest part was still coming. The Vorthak were intelligent hunters, and they would eventually adapt to her tactics. When that happened, she needed to be ready with something they couldn't anticipate. She found what she was looking for in the mining equipment storage on level 8, a case of seismic charges designed for tunnel excavation. Each charge was small enough to fit in her palm, but powerful enough to bring down tons of rock. The storage case required a Galactic Council authorization code to open, but Elena had been maintaining these systems for 3 years. She knew all the back doors. 20 minutes later, Elena had a dozen seismic charges and a detailed plan for using them. The Vorthak were pack hunters who relied on coordination and superior numbers to bring down prey. Elena was going to use that instinct against them. She placed the first charges in the main junction between levels 15 and 16, carefully positioning them to create a controlled collapse that would seal off the central elevator shaft. The second set went into the support beams of level 17, rigged to bring down a section of tunnel that would cut the complex in half. The final charges Elena kept for herself. Her comm unit crackled with static as she worked, occasionally picking up fragments of Galactic Council transmissions from orbit. Captain Vextar had filed his report. Human worker Elena Vasquez lost to native wildlife, acceptable losses within projected parameters. The transport was already jumping to its next destination. Elena felt that cold, hard thing in her chest grow larger. They'd written her off without a second thought. Another expendable human whose death could be justified by profit margins. The Galactic Council saw her species as cheap labor, bred fast, and died young, suitable only for jobs too dangerous for more valuable beings. They were about to learn why humans had fought the hegemony for 7 years before finally surrendering. Elena finished placing her charges and retreated to the maintenance shaft network. Her oxygen recycler showed 17 hours remaining, but she felt a calm certainty settling over her. She'd done everything she could with the time available. Now it was time to see if a human engineer could outthink a pack of apex predators. The Vorthack had regrouped on level 16, their earlier confusion giving way to methodical determination. Elena watched them through a maintenance camera feed, studying their movements and pack dynamics. The injured hunters stayed in the center, while the unharmed ones spread out in a search pattern. They'd learned to avoid the areas affected by her atmosphere processor attacks, but they were still hunting her. Still confident they were the apex predators. Elena triggered the first set of charges. The explosion echoed through the complex like thunder, and Elena felt the entire structure shudder as tons of rock collapsed into the central elevator shaft. Emergency lighting flickered as power conduits were severed, and the environmental systems began cycling through emergency protocols. The Vorthack pack found themselves trapped on level 16 with no way to reach the surface levels or retreat to the deeper tunnels. Elena had turned the mining complex into a cage, and they were locked inside with her. But Elena wasn't finished. She triggered the second set of charges, bringing down the section of tunnel that connected the eastern and western sides of level 16. The Vorthack pack was now split into two groups, unable to coordinate their hunt or support each other. Elena emerged from the maintenance shaft into the western section, moving silently through the emergency-lit tunnels. 3 Vorthack were trapped in this area, 2 uninjured hunters, and 1 limping from burns received in her initial explosion. The wounded one noticed her first, raising its head and testing the air with enhanced senses that had been partially compromised by industrial solvent. Elena stepped out of the shadows where they could see her clearly, making no attempt to hide. The Vorthack hunters tilted their heads in an expression that might have been confusion. Their prey was standing in the open, making no attempt to flee. It went against every hunting instinct they'd evolved over millions of years. Elena raised her hand, showing them the final seismic charge. The lead hunter took a step forward, its metallic claws extended and its mouth open in a threat display. Elena triggered the charge. The explosion brought down half of level 16. When the dust settled and the structural alarms stopped screaming, Elena found herself buried under a pile of rubble in what had once been a tunnel intersection. Her oxygen recycler was damaged, but still functional, showing 11 hours remaining. Her left arm was pinned under a chunk of concrete, and she could taste blood in her mouth. But she was alive, and the Vorthack weren't. Elena began digging herself out of the debris with her free hand, using tools from her maintenance kit to lever away chunks of rock and twisted metal. The work was slow and exhausting, but she'd learned patience during 3 years of maintaining alien machinery under impossible conditions. It took 4 hours to free herself from the rubble. Elena's left arm was badly bruised, but not broken, and her oxygen recycler now showed 6 hours of remaining life. She was running out of time, but the immediate threat was over. The remaining Vorthack were trapped on the eastern side of level 16, cut off from her by tons of collapsed tunnel. Elena could hear them occasionally, their frustrated howls echoing through the wreckage as they searched for a way to reach her. But Elena was already moving deeper into the complex, following maintenance shafts that would take her to the central power core on level 23. The Vorthack might be apex predators, but they'd never learned to think like engineers. Elena Vasquez had 6 hours of oxygen remaining and access to enough fusion power to level a small city. The Galactic Council had abandoned her to die, writing her off as acceptable losses in their profit calculations. They'd made a mistake that was about to reshape how every species in the galaxy viewed humanity. The hunt was entering its final phase, and Elena was no longer the prey. Elena descended through the maintenance shafts toward the power core, her movements careful and deliberate despite the oxygen meter counting down toward zero. The central fusion reactor was buried deep in the heart of the mining complex, surrounded by layers of radiation shielding and automated safety systems that would shut down the entire operation if tampered with. She intended to tamper with all of them. The shaft opened into the reactor chamber, a vast spherical space dominated by the fusion core itself. A sphere of contained plasma 30 meters across, held in place by magnetic fields that hummed with barely contained energy. Warning lights bathed everything in a red glow, and the air tasted of ozone and raw power. Elena dropped down onto the maintenance platform and surveyed the reactor systems with an engineer's appreciation for elegant design. The Galactic Council built their fusion reactors to be efficient, reliable, and completely automated. The few manual controls were positioned for easy access by human maintenance workers, since no other species was willing to work in such close proximity to a contained star. Elena pulled out her datapad and began accessing the reactor's control systems, her fingers dancing across alien interfaces she'd learned to read during years of maintaining Council equipment. The safety protocols were impressive, dozens of redundant systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of sabotage she was contemplating. But the safety systems had been programmed by beings who thought humans were simple laborers, incapable of understanding the sophisticated technology they maintained. Elena had spent 3 years studying these systems, learning their weaknesses and backdoors, storing away knowledge that she'd never thought she would need. Until now, her oxygen recycler chimed a warning. 3 hours remaining. Elena ignored it and continued working, bypassing safety lockouts and disabling monitoring systems with the practiced ease of someone who'd been troubleshooting alien technology for years. The Galactic Council had designed their equipment to be maintained by humans, but never controlled by them. They'd underestimated her species yet again. Elena's comm unit suddenly crackled to life, filled with static but carrying a signal she hadn't expected to hear. Voices speaking in Galactic Standard, transmitting from somewhere in orbit around Xerion Prime. Confirm Vorthack Pack presence in deep levels. Human worker reported missing. Elena adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the signal. The voices became more distinct. Captain Vextar speaking to someone with authority that made even the arrogant Altarian captain defer. Acceptable losses within parameters. Counselor. Mining operation can resume once native wildlife is cleared from complex. Understood, Captain. However, there has been a development. Long-range sensors detect unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. Investigate and report. Elena's blood ran cold as she understood the implications. The Galactic Council wasn't abandoning the mining operation. They were planning to return once the Vorthack threat was eliminated. Her death was just a temporary inconvenience, acceptable losses that could be written off in the quarterly profit reports. But the unusual energy signatures meant they detected her sabotage of the atmosphere processors and seismic charges. If they discovered what she was planning with the fusion reactor, they would send down a strike team to stop her. Elena worked faster, her hands flying across control interfaces as she reconfigured the reactor's magnetic containment fields. The system resisted her attempts at modification, automated safety protocols activating to prevent tampering. Warning messages flashed across her datapad in 17 different languages, all of them explaining why her actions would result in catastrophic system failure. That was exactly what she was counting on. Elena overrode the final safety lockout just as her comm unit erupted with new transmissions. The Council strike team was already descending toward the planet's surface, heavily armed and equipped with sensors capable of detecting human life signs. They would reach the mining complex within 2 hours. Elena smiled grimly and triggered her modifications to the reactor. The magnetic containment fields began fluctuating, causing the plasma core to pulse with unstable energy. The reactor's output increased exponentially, sending power surges through the complex's electrical systems. Emergency lights flickered and died, replaced by the hellish glow of the overloading fusion core. But Elena wasn't trying to cause an explosion. she was doing something much more subtle. The power surges traveled through the complex's electrical systems, following pathways that Elena had carefully mapped during her years of maintenance work. They reached the atmospheric processors she'd sabotaged earlier, overcharging their chemical synthesis systems and turning them into something the original designers had never intended. Throughout the mining complex, the processors began releasing clouds of synthesized pheromones into the ventilation system. The chemicals were based on compounds Elena had analyzed from Vorthack scent markers, but modified and concentrated far beyond anything that occurred naturally. Elena was broadcasting a message in the chemical language of pack hunters, and that message was simple: territory claimed by apex predator. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Vorthack on Zirian Prime, from the injured hunters still trapped in the complex to the wild packs roaming the planet's surface, suddenly detected the scent of something that registered as the ultimate alpha predator. The chemical signature was so concentrated and alien that it triggered every survival instinct the species had evolved over millions of years. Elena watched through the complex's security cameras as the remaining Vorthack in Level 16 abandoned their hunt and fled toward the surface, their pack structure completely dissolved by primal terror. Throughout the mining complex, automated sensors detected movement as other creatures that had been hiding in the deep tunnels also began retreating from the source of the alien scent. But Elena's modifications had one more effect that she hadn't anticipated. The overcharged atmospheric processors were broadcasting the synthetic pheromone signature beyond the mining complex, spreading it across the planet's entire atmosphere. Every Vorthack pack on Zirian Prime was now receiving the same message. Something had claimed this world as its hunting ground, something more dangerous than anything they'd ever encountered. Elena's oxygen recycler chimed another warning. 90 minutes remaining. She gathered her tools and climbed back into the maintenance shaft system, heading for the surface levels. The Council Strike team would be looking for a human survivor, expecting to find someone hiding in the depths of the complex. They wouldn't expect to find someone who'd turned an entire planet into her territory. Elena reached the surface level just as the Council Strike team's shuttle appeared in the poisonous sky of Zirian Prime. The craft was sleek and predatory, designed for quick insertion and extraction of military personnel. Elena could see weapon ports along its hull and the distinctive energy signatures of military-grade shields. The shuttle circled the mining complex twice before landing on the main platform, its engines kicking up clouds of toxic dust. The airlock cycled open and 6 figures emerged, their powered armor gleaming under the alien sun. Elena recognized the configuration: hegemony shock troopers, veterans of the war against Earth, and specialists in dealing with human resistance. The Galactic Council had sent killers to clean up their acceptable losses. Elena watched from a concealed position as the strike team spread out across the complex, their sensors sweeping for human life signs. They moved with professional efficiency, checking each building systematically while maintaining communication with their ship. But something was wrong with their movements. Elena could see tension in their posture, the way they kept glancing at their sensor readings and exchanging confused signals. The team leader, a massive hegemony warrior whose armor was decorated with campaign ribbons from a dozen conquered worlds, stopped near the entrance to the deep levels and consulted his instruments. "Command, we're detecting anomalous atmospheric readings across the entire planet. Chemical composition suggests the presence of a previously unknown apex predator. Recommend immediate evacuation and orbital bombardment." Elena's comm unit picked up the response from orbit. "Negative, strike leader. Complete your mission. One human survivor cannot justify abandoning a profitable mining operation." The strike team leader's response was sharp with tension. "Sir, respectfully, these readings indicate something that could kill a hegemony battle squadron. Whatever's down here, it's not human." Elena felt a surge of dark satisfaction. Her improvised chemical weapon was so effective that even veteran hegemony soldiers were afraid to enter the complex. The synthetic pheromone signature was broadcasting a simple message in a language every predator understood. Here lives death. But the team leader was following orders, and Elena could see him steeling himself for the descent into the deep levels. 6 professional killers armed with military-grade weapons were about to hunt for a human engineer with 90 minutes of oxygen remaining. Elena checked her remaining equipment, basic maintenance tools, a few spare parts, and the knowledge she'd gained from 3 years of maintaining alien technology. Against 6 hegemony shock troopers, it should have been suicide. But Elena Vasquez was no longer thinking like prey. She was thinking like the apex predator that every creature on Zirian Prime now believed her to be. Elena disappeared into the maintenance shaft network one final time, moving toward a position that would give her access to the complex's main power distribution system. The hegemony soldiers were equipped with powered armor that relied on sophisticated electronics and energy shielding. Elena was about to show them what happened when a human engineer decided to stop being acceptable losses. The hunt was entering its final phase, but the roles of predator and prey had been reversed in ways the Galactic Council was only beginning to understand. Elena reached the main power distribution center just as the hegemony strike team began their descent into the complex. Through the security cameras, she watched them move with military precision, their powered armor gleaming under emergency lighting as they checked each level methodically. Their equipment was impressive. Energy shields capable of deflecting plasma weapons, targeting systems that could track multiple threats simultaneously, and enough firepower to level a small building. Against any normal human, they would be unstoppable. But Elena was done being normal. She opened the main power distribution panel and studied the alien circuitry with an engineer's eye for weakness. The complex's electrical system was designed with multiple redundancies and safety features, all intended to prevent exactly the kind of electromagnetic pulse she was planning to generate. Elena began disconnecting those safety features one by one. Her oxygen recycler chimed insistently. 45 minutes remaining. Elena ignored the warning and continued working, rerouting power conduits and bypassing surge protectors with practiced efficiency. The Galactic Council had built their systems to be maintained by humans, but never weaponized by them. Another critical error in judgment. Elena's comm unit crackled with transmissions from the strike team as they reached level 10. Their voices were tense, professional soldiers reporting information that didn't match their expectations. Command, we're not finding any trace of the human survivor, but the atmospheric readings are getting stronger. Whatever's broadcasting this pheromone signature is close. Maintain mission parameters, strike leader. Locate and eliminate the human-designated Elena Vasquez. Elena felt that familiar cold hardness in her chest as she listened to them discuss her execution in clinical terms. To the Galactic Council, she was just acceptable losses that had inconveniently survived longer than projected. Her death was a clerical matter, something to be handled efficiently and forgotten. They were still thinking of her as expendable labor. Elena finished her modifications to the power distribution system and checked the results on her datapad. The complex's fusion reactor was now configured to release its entire energy output through the electrical grid in one massive surge. The electromagnetic pulse would be powerful enough to disable any electronic equipment within the mining complex, including hegemony-powered armor. But timing would be critical. Elena needed the strike team to be deep enough in the complex that they couldn't retreat to their shuttle before the pulse disabled their life support systems. She waited, watching their progress through security cameras as they descended level by level. The team leader kept consulting his sensors, his movements growing more cautious as the synthetic pheromone readings intensified. Elena had turned the atmospheric processors into a psychological weapon that was affecting even hardened military veterans. The strike team reached level 15, the same area where Elena had first encountered the Vorthack pack. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the air still carried traces of industrial solvent and superheated steam from her earlier sabotage. "Sir," one of the soldiers reported, his voice tight with suppressed fear, "these atmospheric readings suggest we're in the territory of something that could kill a Krogati war beast. I've never seen pheromone concentrations this intense." The team leader's response was sharp with authority and growing paranoia. "Maintain formation. Whatever's down here, we have enough firepower to handle it." Elena smiled grimly and triggered her electromagnetic pulse. The fusion reactor released its stored energy in a massive surge that traveled through every circuit in the mining complex. Emergency lighting died instantly, plunging the deep levels into absolute darkness. The environmental systems shut down with grinding finality, and the comforting hum of machinery faded into ominous silence. In the depths of the complex, 6 hegemony shock troopers suddenly found themselves blind, deaf, and trapped in powered armor that had become their tomb. Elena activated her emergency lighting and began moving through the maintenance shafts, heading toward level 15. Her oxygen recycler showed 30 minutes remaining, but she no longer needed to conserve her resources. The final phase of the hunt was beginning, and Elena intended to finish what the Galactic Council had started. She emerged from a maintenance shaft into a tunnel intersection where the strike team was struggling with their disabled equipment. In the glow of her emergency light, Elena could see them clustered together, their sophisticated armor reduced to bulky metal shells. They'd activated emergency chemical lights, but the pale illumination only made the shadows deeper and more threatening. "Contact!" the team leader shouted, raising a weapon that no longer had power for its targeting systems. "Human survivor located." Elena stepped into the circle of chemical light, making no attempt to hide or seek cover. 6 professional soldiers trained their weapons on her, but she could see the uncertainty in their movements. Their equipment had failed completely, leaving them with basic kinetic weapons and whatever training they could remember from before they'd become dependent on technology. "You're Elena Vasquez," the team leader stated, his voice muffled by his helmet's failing communication systems. "By order of the Galactic Council, you are designated for immediate termination." Elena tilted her head, studying the soldiers with the same clinical interest they'd shown when discussing her execution. "You know what's interesting about humans?" she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silence. "Everyone thinks we're weak because we're small and soft and we die young." She took a step forward, and despite their training and weapons, the soldiers took a step back. "But here's what you missed," Elena continued, her tone conversational despite the weapons pointed at her. "Humans are persistence hunters. We don't give up when cornered. We adapt." The team leader fired his weapon, the kinetic round sparking off the stone wall where Elena had been standing a moment before. But she was already moving, disappearing into the maze of maintenance shafts that honeycombed the complex. "Spread out," the team leader commanded. "Find her." But Elena was already 3 levels away, moving through passages too narrow for armored soldiers to follow. She reached Atmospheric Processor 21 and began another series of modifications, her hands working with desperate efficiency as her oxygen supply counted down toward 0. 20 minutes remaining. Elena reconfigured the processor to release concentrated industrial acid into the ventilation system, serving level 15. The corrosive would eat through the seals on the soldiers' armor, turning their protection into a slow death trap. 15 minutes. She modified Processor 18 to generate electromagnetic interference that would disrupt any remaining electronic equipment the soldiers might have. Their chemical lights would fail, leaving them in absolute darkness with no way to coordinate their movements. 10 minutes. Elena climbed back into the maintenance shaft system and headed for the central power core. She had one final modification to make, something that would ensure the Galactic Council understood exactly what they'd created when they abandoned a human engineer to die. 5 minutes. Elena reached the reactor chamber and began her final sabotage. She wasn't trying to cause an explosion anymore. She was doing something much more sophisticated, something that would broadcast a message across the entire Xerian system. 2 minutes. Elena triggered her modifications to the fusion reactor and felt the deck plates vibrate as the core began generating a subspace pulse that would be detectable by every ship within 10 light years. The pulse carried a specific frequency, one that had been banned by galactic treaty since the war between Earth and the hegemony. It was the emergency beacon used by human resistance fighters when they'd achieved strategic objectives against impossible odds. Elena's oxygen recycler showed 30 seconds remaining as she collapsed against the reactor housing, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. But her work was finished. Throughout the mining complex, 6 hegemony soldiers were dying slowly in their disabled armor, victims of industrial acid and electromagnetic interference. On the surface, automated systems were broadcasting Elena's synthetic pheromone signature across the planet's entire atmosphere, marking Xerian Prime as territory claimed by something that even apex predators feared. And throughout the Xerian system, Elena's subspace beacon was transmitting a message that would reach every human ship, every resistance cell, and every refugee camp within 10 light years. The message was simple. One human engineer had been abandoned to die on Xerian Prime. She had survived by turning an entire planet into her weapon. The Galactic Council's acceptable losses were no longer acceptable. Elena closed her eyes as her oxygen finally ran out, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction despite her approaching death. The Council had written her off as expendable labor, cheap and disposable, suitable only for dangerous work that more valuable species wouldn't take. They made a critical error that would reshape how every species in the galaxy viewed humanity. 3 days later, the first human ships arrived in the Xerian system. They found the mining complex abandoned, its Galactic Council operators having fled when the Vorthack population began migrating away from a planet they now considered occupied by something beyond their understanding. Elena's body was discovered in the reactor chamber, her hands still resting on the controls that had turned an entire world into humanity's first independent colony since the end of the war. The subspace beacon was still broadcasting, drawing more human ships to a system the Council had suddenly decided was unprofitable to maintain. Within a month, 50,000 human refugees had settled on Xerian Prime. The planet's toxic atmosphere was no obstacle to a species that had learned to thrive in environments other beings considered uninhabitable. The synthetic pheromone signature that terrified native predators became a useful defense against unwanted visitors. The Galactic Council tried to reclaim their mining operation, but discovered that humans had a different interpretation of property rights. Elena's modifications to the complex had given her species legal claim to the entire planet under ancient salvage laws that the Council had forgotten existed. Captain Vextar filed a report claiming that the loss of Xerian Prime was an acceptable business expense, the result of unpredictable native wildlife and equipment failure. But throughout the galaxy, other species began studying the incident more carefully. A single human engineer, abandoned to die and written off as expendable labor, had claimed an entire planet through nothing more than technical knowledge and sheer determination. The implications were troubling for species that had built their galactic civilization on the assumption that humans were weak, disposable creatures suitable only for dangerous work. Elena Vasquez died alone on an alien world, but her legacy spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Every human settlement, every resistance cell, and every refugee camp learned the story of the mechanic who refused to be acceptable losses. The Galactic Council had made a critical error when they decided humans were expendable labor. They'd forgotten that their cheap, disposable workers were the descendants of a species that had fought the entire hegemony for 7 years before surrendering. They'd forgotten that humans were persistence hunters who didn't give up when cornered. They'd forgotten that when you push a human too far, they don't just fight back. They get creative. In the depths of space, human ships continued arriving at Zirian Prime, drawn by a beacon that still broadcast Elena's final message. The planet she'd claimed through courage and engineering skill became the foundation for humanity's return to the stars, no longer as acceptable losses, but as equals who had earned their place through blood and determination. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating what happened when humans decided to stop being expendable. Elena Vasquez had seen to that.